Tonight at 10, Ukraine says 40,000 people need to be evacuated after a major dam is damaged in the south, causing widespread flooding. The dam separates Russian-held territory to the south from Ukrainian land in the north. Each side has blamed the other. 80 towns and villages along the Dnipro River are flooded, but there's no let-up in the shelling, as our team on the ground found out.
So can you tell me what's happened here?
And the military have pushed us away from the flooding because of that threat. It sits right by the river, which is a front line, and today it got wider.
The EU has accused Russia of a war crime, but Rishi Sunak is more cautious, saying it's too early to say definitively what has happened. Also on the programme, Prince Harry makes history, becoming the first senior royal to give evidence in court for more than 100 years in his phone hacking trial. Destroying fields of poppies in Afghanistan after the Taliban banned their cultivation for opium, but farmers ask how they're to feed their families. And the rift that rocked the world of golf is suddenly healed, to the astonishment of onlookers.
On BBC London, can recruiting more community support officers restore trust in the Met? And the debate over festivals being held in London's parks and green spaces.
Good evening. After the destruction of part of a crucial dam in southern Ukraine, thousands of people have been forced to evacuate towns and villages to escape rising floodwaters. The dam sits between Russian-held territory to the south and Ukrainian territory to the north. Kyiv says that Moscow is to blame, and so do NATO and the EU, which has called the destruction a war crime. Rishi Sunak is more cautious, saying it's too soon to make a definitive judgment. Russia claims Ukraine is behind the damage. Tonight we'll be looking at whether there is any evidence to back that up. And with the help of our expert team at BBC Verify, we'll study images of the damage done to the dam. We'll also be examining the risks to Europe's largest nuclear plant at Zaporizhia, which is upriver from the dam. But first, our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse has spent the day travelling to the affected area, and he joins us now. James.
Rita, we've been pushed away from the flooding. This is a city, Kherson, which spends the night in complete darkness just because of where it's situated. Now, being back here, you're reminded of what it's gone through. It was occupied. It was then liberated after heavy fighting. And now this, where its streets are now filled with the water from the river Dnipro. This war has another devastating dimension. A breach of a barrier designed to protect. This is the major Kakhovka Dam, failing to contain a reservoir resembling a sea. The waters of Ukraine's Dnipro River surge downstream towards dozens of towns and villages. This is effectively a front line which separates territory Ukraine controls and Russia occupies. Close to the Dnipro's mouth is the city of Kherson. Officials are worried this flooding could become catastrophic. When our team arrived this afternoon, it didn't take long to find out what life here is like. It's dangerous, says Catalina. Then, Russia may have retreated here last year, but they're not far away. It takes a lot in these parts to make people leave. Fast. Back upstream, you can't really see what's left of the dam and hydroelectric plant. So, who did this? Russia controls this area, but blames Ukraine. Kyiv is in no doubt.
The
Kakhovka hydroelectric power station. It was an absolutely deliberate, prepared explosion. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Tonight, the Kyiv regime committed another terrorist crime. The Kakhovka hydroelectric dam was blown up, which led to the flooding of significant territories.
So what is the significance of the Kakhovka Dam? It supplies water to huge swathes of agricultural land, including in Crimea, and the reservoir behind it provides water to cool the Zaporizhia nuclear plant further upriver. Both areas are under Russian control. The reservoir is huge. The Dnieper River is especially wide here. 150 miles long and up to 14 miles across. This is what the dam looks like undamaged. Our colleagues at BBC Verify said this image of a smaller breach was taken just days ago. But since early this morning, this is what the dam has turned into. Thousands of people are at risk from flooding. Whole villages are under water. In Tunaka, the landscape is transformed. Whoever destroyed the dam knew this would happen and decided it was worth it. One Ukrainian MP watched as the river burst its banks. You can see how the water is coming up every second, he says. It's starting to rise. Ukraine has been ravaged by becoming a giant battlefield. A country forever remoulded and now a region partially submerged. James Waterhouse, BBC News, Kherson.
Well, as we heard, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant relies on water flow from the reservoir upstream of the dam to cool its reactors. Nuclear experts say they are monitoring the situation closely, but there's no evidence that the plant's safety has been compromised. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh explains the risks.
The threat of an explosion at one of Ukraine's nuclear plants has come several times during the conflict, and now, once again, at the Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia facility, with reports that water levels were dropping from a reservoir that's needed for cooling the plant. The UN's nuclear safety body said that the situation was under control, at least for the time being.
Our current assessment is that there is no immediate risk to the safety of the plant. We are following this by the minute, as you can imagine.
The nuclear power plant is nearly 100 miles from the dam, so what are the risks? The first is the nuclear reactors, which are used to generate electricity, but they're all shut down and well below their normal operating temperatures. Experts say they don't really need any additional water. The second is the cooling pond, which is topped up by the reservoir. It supplies the area that keeps a spent nuclear fuel rods from overheating.
Because the fuel's been in there for a long time, it's getting quite cold now, so it's not generating that much heat and therefore would take months to have any problem where they would need to replenish the water.
And when additional water is needed, the UN's nuclear safety body says that the cooling pond has enough water to meet the plant's needs for several months. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
We'll have more from James Waterhouse in just a moment, but first to our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg, who's in Moscow for us. And Steve, what is the Russian public being told about what happened to the dam?
Well, I watched the main evening news bulletin on Russian TV tonight, and it was all about, quote, Ukrainian terrorists, Ukrainian nationalists, Ukrainian saboteurs. In other words, Russians are being told in no uncertain terms that the destruction of the dam was a Ukrainian terrorist attack, nothing to do with Russia. And it's not just the TV telling them that. Senior Russian officials were lining up today to pass on the same message. But that message doesn't cut through so well outside of Russia. Political leaders from Canada to Brussels were making the point today that whatever was the specific cause of this disaster, it was Russia's war that was the reason why it happened. If there was no war, then that dam would still be intact, it would still be standing today. In the words of the UN, what happened was the devastating consequence of Russia's invasion. Now, as far as the Ukrainian counter-offensive is concerned, Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, came out today and claimed that it had started 3 days ago, but had been thwarted. He claimed there were heavy Ukrainian casualties, but presented no evidence to back up that claim.
And James, how does what's happened affect Ukraine's counteroffensive?
Well, Rita, I think it is still, if you go on what US officials are saying just today, it is still in its early phases. It has started, nevertheless, where Ukrainian forces, small new units, are probing different parts of this vast front line. They're trying to find different weaknesses. So what the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam means is that a major potential crossing point has effectively been taken off the table. It means Ukrainian forces couldn't cross along the dam itself, and it also means that they couldn't mount some kind of amphibious assault involving boats, involving troops making their way across, trying to form some kind of temporary crossing to eventually push forward. That it would be the most ambitious attempt. I think in military circles it was seen as one of the least likely paths for a counter-offensive. But for Kiev, it's about making Russia guess. And I think what we've seen from invading forces is an effective counterpunch. After months of Ukraine and the West talking up this counter-offensive, Russia previously has tried to seize control of the narrative and the information war, and should Moscow be behind the destruction of this dam, then it is a counterpunch. But working out exactly who is behind it, who is behind this apparent detonation, I don't think we will ever realise, but we need to be bright-eyed to the military dynamics around at a crucial phase for Ukraine in this conflict as it tries to unlock what has been months of static fighting.
Thank you, James Waterhouse there, live in Kherson, and thank you too to Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Prince Harry has become the first senior member of the royal family to give evidence in court for 130 years after taking to the witness stand in his civil case against Mirror Group newspapers. He's accused the publisher of using unlawful methods, including phone hacking, to get stories about him, something they deny. Our media editor Katie Razzle has been following the case at the High Court in London and has sent this report.
In a cul-de-sac in central London, the world's media, focused on itself and one man. Others have settled claims over the years, but here was Prince Harry, determined to have his day in court. Telling those inside a packed Court 15 and an overflow annex that every single article written about him had caused him distress, and agreeing he had felt hostility to the media even before he knew about their methods. He was asked about this line in his witness statement: how much more blood will stain their typing fingers before someone can put a stop to this madness? Prince Harry told the court he was talking about journalists responsible for causing a lot of pain, upset, the press in general. Asked if he was in the witness box to put a stop to this madness, he replied, "That is my hope." Harry's case is that specific articles in Mirror Group newspapers from 1996 to 2011 were based on phone hacking and other unlawful information gathering, often by private investigators. Today he's been questioned about them in detail. He says the journalist behind this story about a visit from his mother on his 12th birthday was a known user of private investigators. MGN's barrister told him journalists could not have hacked his mobile phone as he didn't have one back then. Harry replied, "It could have been my mother's." How could journalists know he was at the particular pub as reported in this article, Prince Harry asks. Isn't it likely the celebrity chef owner contacted the paper, Mr. Green suggested? And MGN's barrister told him this story of a thumb injury had already been reported by the Press Association the day before. Harry claims that just encouraged others to take stories further using illicit methods for that extra information. He says he was often teased at school after these kind of articles. It caused him paranoia and distress, led him to dump friends, even to distrust his own brother William when a disagreement leaked. MGN denies phone hacking and unlawful information gathering for the articles under scrutiny in a civil trial on which a judge, not a jury, will decide, explains this lawyer.
On the balance of probabilities, is it more likely than not that the Mirror engaged in phone hacking? Or is it more likely than not that they didn't, that they're weighing up just to see where that balance tilts? So it's a slightly different standard, a lower standard, if you like.
The Prince also had sharp words for the former Daily Mirror editor, now TV presenter Piers Morgan, saying he makes him physically sick and that he wants to hold him and others accountable for their vile behaviour. Mr. Morgan denies wrongdoing. For the best part of 5 hours inside here, Prince Harry calmly, quietly, seriously answered the questions put to him. Questions designed to show that his claims are wrong. In his witness statement, he was broad in his criticism of the media, and he raised eyebrows and some hackles when he described not just the British press, but the government as at rock bottom. But then he has broken so many of the rules of being a royal. Political criticism is just another one to add to the list. He, though, has found his calling to make reform of the press his life's work.
You're right.
It's been an intense day for Prince Harry. the first time a senior royal has been cross-examined in more than a century. And there's more to come tomorrow. Katie Razzle, BBC News.
The world of golf has been stunned by the sudden merger of tours which had been bitter enemies. The PGA and DP World Tour have agreed to merge with LIV, a breakaway circuit backed by Saudi Arabia. The launch of LIV rocked men's professional golf over the past year after it poached several top players, lured by its huge prize money. Here's our sports editor, Dan Rowan.
For the last year, it's been tearing the world of golf apart. Bankrolled by Saudi Arabia, the Rebel LIV series lured some of the game's biggest stars away from the traditional tours, sparking an unprecedented dispute. But today came news of a shock merger and an end to their feud. In a joint statement, the PGA Tour, DP World Tour and Saudi Public Investment Fund hailed a landmark agreement to unify the game of golf on a global basis with a new collectively owned for-profit entity, vowing to work together to best feature and grow team golf going forward. Notably, today's announcement, they said, will be followed by a mutually agreed end to all pending litigation between the participating parties. Featuring huge prize money, a shorter 3-day format and a team element, those behind LIV claimed its innovations would attract new audiences, but critics saw it as an attempt to seize control of the sport.
I hate what it's doing to the game of golf. I hate it.
With legal disputes in both the US and in Europe, where several LIV golfers lost a case over the fines and suspensions they faced for playing in the series.
The time was right for all three parties to come together, and there is no question that all three partners shared the appetite to get a deal done.
As for the players themselves, Phil Mickelson paid a reported £160 million to sign up to LIV, tweeted "Awesome day today." But for other leading PGA Tour players, it seemed to come as a surprise. Two-time major winner Colin Morikawa saying, "I love finding out morning news on Twitter." Ian Poulter and Sergio Garcia were among several top LIV players who walked away from the DP World Tour and became ineligible for the Ryder Cup, but they could now return. Already the chair of Saudi-owned Newcastle United, another of the kingdom's growing list of sports investments, PIF Governor Yasser Al Rumayyan will now chair the new golf entity, with the PIF also providing fresh funds, reinforcing the concerns of human rights campaigners that this is sports washing, something I put to Al Rumayyan last year.
It's the big thing in golf, and we're going to enjoy it. That's why I'm here. Thank you very much.
Can I ask you very quickly about these suggestions of sports washing? What do you say to that? What's your response?
I'm really not sure about this terminology.
For many in the sport, however, today's peace deal will come as a major relief. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
More than 80% of the world's opium, which is the main ingredient of heroin, used to be produced in Afghanistan. But last year, opium poppy cultivation was banned by the Taliban. The BBC has found evidence that the Taliban government has had major success in cracking down on it, with experts suggesting that opium farming is down by as much as 4/5 in a year. But in a country reeling from an economic crisis, farmers say this is another blow. Our correspondent Yogita Lemai has sent this report from Afghanistan.
Men who were once fighting for this land now control it. And they're enforcing the diktat of their leader. This is the Taliban anti-narcotics unit. Deep in eastern Afghanistan, they stop when they see a field of poppy. While the men raise it, their commander shouts at the family that owns the land. "I told you to destroy it yourselves." Hidden from view, a woman screams back in anger, but then retreats indoors. Within minutes, it's all gone. The poppy that this family spent months growing. Their son is detained for defying the ban. Released later with a warning. We've been given rare access to the Taliban's campaign to eradicate poppy in Nangarhar province. They've been at it for 5 months already. So now We have to get to more remote areas near the border with Pakistan to find standing crop.
So the field to the right, that's already been destroyed, and we're walking to another one which they are in the process of destroying right now.
Farmers here know how harmful opium is. There are high levels of addiction in their own country. But there's no other option, says Ali Muhammad Mia, whose field was destroyed.
If you don't have enough food in your house and your children are going hungry, what else will you do? If we grew wheat instead, we won't earn enough to survive.
When they hit those stalks hard, they sometimes come flying in the air. What definitely comes flying is the sap from these buds. That's the opium resin. There's a very pungent smell of it in the air right now.
The Taliban go armed and in large numbers. There have been instances of clashes with angry locals. They're accused of profiting from opium when they were fighting against foreign forces and the former Afghan regime, a claim the Taliban deny. But now, from what we've seen and from satellite images, there's evidence of an unprecedented reduction. This is Helmand province. It used to be Afghanistan's opium heartland. Wheat now stands where poppy was grown. Niamatullah Dilsoz tells us that in this Taliban stronghold area, farmers have all but complied with the order.
We are very upset. We can't meet our family's needs. I've had to take a loan. Hunger is at its peak and we haven't got any help from the government.
We met the main spokesman of the Taliban government, who told us they banned opium because it's harmful and goes against their religious beliefs. Farmers say they're not getting any support from your government. How do you plan to help them?
We know that people are very poor, but opium causes a lot of addiction. We call on international organizations to help Afghans facing losses.
But then at the same time, you're all making the operations and the funding of aid agencies in this country extremely difficult by the ban on Afghan women working for them. You can't have it both ways.
They should not link humanitarian issues with political matters. Opium isn't just harming Afghanistan. The whole world is affected by it.
Opium ferried from Afghan fields produces nearly all of the heroin sold in Europe. How will prices be impacted? We went to Kandahar, another major poppy-growing province, to find out. We met a farmer holding on to a small stash of his harvest from last year. We're not naming him to protect him. He told us the price of each of these bags is now 5 times what it was before the ban. He's waiting for it to rise further so it can sustain his family longer. For now, the Taliban appear to have accomplished what no one else could. But there are questions about how long they can sustain it. Yogita Lamai, BBC News, Kandahar.
Here, the lobby group, the CBI, which represents thousands of British businesses, has won the backing of its members for a series of proposed reforms after a crisis that threatened its future. 93% of those who voted supported the plans. It follows a series of allegations of serious sexual misconduct, which prompted many businesses to end their membership. The government hasn't said if or when it'll re-engage with the CBI. There's been a sharp rise in sexually transmitted diseases in England, with a record number of cases of gonorrhea last year and the highest levels of syphilis since the end of World War II. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, is here with more. Fergus.
Thanks, Rita. After a dip during COVID, these sexually transmitted bacterial infections are back with a vengeance. There were more than 82,000 cases of gonorrhea last year in England. That's up 50% on 2021, and it's the highest number since 1918, the year the First World War ended, when cases began being recorded. As for syphilis, there were more than 8,600 cases last year. That's the largest number since just after the Second World War. Chlamydia was the most commonly diagnosed STI, with almost 200,000 cases recorded, with the 15 to 24 age group most likely to get an infection. The UK Health Security Agency says only some of the rise can be accounted for by increased testing. It says condoms are the best defence.
Young people in particular often regard condoms as a means to prevent unplanned pregnancy. However, it's vital that people of all ages use condoms to reduce their risk of STIs to protect their health and their partner's health.
There are concerns that gonorrhea is becoming increasingly resistant to antibiotics and at risk of becoming untreatable in future. The Terence Higgins Trust said cuts to sexual health services were making a bad situation worse, with many people struggling to get appointments. Rita.
Thank you, Fergus. In rugby, London Irish have become the third club to be suspended from the Premiership this season following financial issues. They won't play in any league next season after failing to prove that they have the money to continue operating and missing a deadline to pay staff and players. The government has now appointed independent advisors to support the sport, as our correspondent Natalie Perks reports.
This was the end of their season, but it turned out to be the end of an era. London Irish players and staff tonight learned their fate on a Zoom call. 125 years of history potentially gone. Fans are struggling to understand just how it came to this.
I would say heartbroken is a very accurate description. It can't get any worse than this, to be honest with you. I can't imagine a life now not supporting London Irish.
Well, London Irish's demise is just the latest chapter in a sorry story of Premiership rugby. They're the third club to fall in just 9 months, with a recent report saying the problems were a stain on the reputation of the governing body.
Bad news, eh? The dream's over, bro.
Worcester Warriors were the first club to go under. Players discovering they'd been relegated in October. They still can't operate as a professional club. And last month, 6 times English champions Wasps were demoted to the foot of the rugby pyramid after debts of more than £95 million forced them into administration. All 3 clubs were being chased for unpaid taxes.
It gets to a point whereby for 3 clubs, they're just losing way too much money. There's too many debts that need paying. And it comes to a point where those debts need calling.
The pandemic exacerbated clubs' already perilous finances. The government is worried and has appointed independent advisors to help the sport.
He's still going, Mitchell, gives it to Arundel! What a score!
One of the stars of London Irish, whose future now lies elsewhere. On the pitch, rugby union enjoys sold-out internationals, but off it, clubs have been accused of sleepwalking into a crisis. Natalie Perks, BBC News, Twickenham.
Astrid Gilberto, considered one of the greatest Brazilian singers of all time, has died at the age of 83.
Tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking.
With her soft and sultry voice, her version of The Girl from Ipanema was an instant hit, propelling her to fame, winning her a Grammy and helping to popularise bossa nova around the world. In later years, she withdrew from the limelight, concentrating instead on animal welfare and also on her painting. The Brazilian singer Astrid Gilberto, who's died at the age of 83. That song will stay with us all evening. Chris, the weather.
Yeah, it almost fits this kind of picture, doesn't it? It looks kind of tropical, doesn't it? This was the setting sun over the Highlands of Scotland. This Weather Watch picture sent to us by Rossi just in the last hour or so, and what a beautiful picture it is. Now, you might have noticed our weather's not really been changing very much over recent times. I've been delving through the stats book. In Church Lawford, which is in Warwickshire, it's not rained here since the 11th of May. That's nearly 4 weeks of dry weather. And over recent times, one of the warmest spots in the UK has been in County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. Castledirg, we've had 9 days over the 20-degree mark. Today we had 24 degrees, and actually that's 5 of the last 9 days that we've seen those kind of temperature levels. That's 6 above average. Now back to today's weather picture. We've seen a lot of cloud around, and that cloud's moving back in at the moment from the North Sea, thickening up all the while. Could be an odd spit of drizzle from it across East Scotland, central and eastern areas of England, maybe a few mist patches for West Scotland and for parts of Northern Ireland. Our overnight temperatures around 8 or 9 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow, well, you start off with a lot of cloud across these eastern areas, but I think there's a better chance of seeing the clouds breaking away from eastern Wales across the Midlands, sunshine coming out across the southeast. But again, it's these western areas of the UK that will have the best of the sunshine and the highest of the temperatures, quite widely reaching the low to even mid-20s in the warmest spots. But if cloud does linger around these eastern coastal areas, it will be a little bit cooler. Very high levels of grass pollen around, so for those that are allergic to that, tomorrow could be pretty sneezy. On into Thursday, again it's a dry picture, probably more in the way of sunshine, maybe a few patches of cloud lingering for East Scotland and North East England. Again, that could keep things a little on the cool side here. But otherwise, temperatures widely into the low 20s, probably peaking around 24 degrees across parts of the west. We then start to see a change in the weather pattern. Friday similar, dry, sunny again, but into the weekend it starts to get a little bit more humid. And as those humidity levels rise, we're likely to see some showers and thunderstorms break out. And for some of us, that will bring the first significant rainfall we've seen for 4 weeks. That's the latest. Rita.
Chris, thank you. And that is tonight's BBC News at 10. There's more analysis of the day's main stories over on Newsnight with Victoria Derbyshire. There she is, just getting underway on BBC Two, but the news continues also here on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. But from the 10 o'clock team, it's good night.